Okay, welcome everyone. I'm really pleased that you could join us, and I'm very excited that my guest this afternoon is Pastor John Finkeldy. John was a pastor of my church for 30 years, the same church 30 years, and senior pastor of that church for 20 years. So he's definitely got the runs on the board, and I know his amazing wife Diane and his kids, and I can tell you that he's a man of great integrity, and what you see is what you get with John. I know him really well. He likes good coffee, so don't ever serve him bad coffee. He likes photography, he likes the surf and being at the beach. He's partial to a mention of his grandsons. It could even come up today, just warning you. And he's unfortunately deceived by Android gadgets, but I'm still working on him. And he supports the best football team in the world. So go the Mighty Swans. Welcome, John Finkeldy.
Maybe choke then, Sharon. Go the Mighty Swans. Dear me. Got to get a word
What, did I get that wrong?
I hold up my Samsung phone.
Oh, don't tell me you're deceived in football as well as the devices.
Love the Dockers. West Australian boy. I've got to go for a local team. Can't go for one on the eastern states. That would not be appropriate.
Well, I claim the same excuse for supporting Sydney. So
Fremantle must be your second side then, surely, living now over here. So.
Well, yes, because they're winning more than the Eagles are. So.
You just go with the winners.
I do like a winner. I'm partial to a winner, I have to say that.
Yeah, me too, but I'm still a Dockers fan regardless.
Well, do you want to tell us a bit about what you've done with Grow a Healthy Church? Because I know that you've launched now and you've been helping lots of people. I've seen lots of videos online with testimonials, with pastors saying how much help you've been to them. So what does growahealthychurch.com do? What are you about?
Yeah, look, Diane, I've always had this passion and empathy for pastors and churches not only growing but being healthy when they grow. So a few years ago we decided, as we were transitioning out of our role of pastoring our church, we decided that what we'd love to do all the time is get alongside churches and pastors and kind of get into their world and help them out, help their church get healthier than what it is. So pretty well that's what we're doing all the time now. Just finished our 41st consult in the last 2 years.
Wow, okay.
So it's been great. We love it. Kind of get alongside. Sorry, say again?
Are they local churches? Because I see you sometimes, you like landing in Sydney, and is it all over the nation?
Yeah, I love to put on social media which city I'm currently in. So it's all over Australia. We've done a few consults overseas as well, in Europe and New Zealand, but primarily across Australia. So yeah, spread across about 8 different denominations we're involved with. So it's not just one particular flavour of church. It's very different style of churches, and also different sizes of churches, from about 50 people through to about 1,000.
Okay.
Pretty well involved in every spectrum in between those numbers as well. So yeah, look, it's fantastic working with churches, regardless of the size or the style of the church, just to kind of get into the church and help them where we know we can help them using our expertise, our studies and so on, to kind of get them going to where we think they want to go.
So is it coaching? How do you help them? What do you actually do when you're with these churches?
Yeah, so we go into a church in our on-site consults. We also do online consulting, but our on-site consult we go in for 4 days, and we spend quite a lot of that 4 days sitting with the pastor and their spouse, and just talking with them, interviewing them, analysing various pathways in the church for quite a long time. We interview about 6 key leaders in the church, spend some time with them just to kind of get down to the grassroots of the volunteers and staff of the church. We do some training with the volunteers, also with the heads of departments, some very specific training, do some coaching with the board while we're there on current best practices for boards, and then do ministry on the Sunday. Though what some churches have asked me to do is actually not preach, asked me to sit in the congregation and either kind of critique and coach their preaching or some of their other preachers. They'll have them preach, and then we'll sit down afterwards and kind of see where we can kind of help them improve in their preaching as well. So, look, it's an intense 4 days, and you find clients will say after the 4 days they're kind of like need a bit of a breather. But at the end of the 4 days, we leave with them a full written package of recommendations, very practical recommendations on how they can kind of shift some things in the life of their church. Yeah,
so
pretty full on, but helpful.
But do they really need it? No one really needs it, do they? Because most pastors are trained at Bible college for like a year before they start their church. So
yeah,
why would they need to have this intensive consult or extra coaching or an online consult or whatever? Why would they need to have that when they've already had other training?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think what happens, pastors will go to seminary or college, do a degree or whatever. They'll have a lot of in-depth sort of development, and then suddenly they get into the hot seat of pastoring. And it's quite a different ballgame to Bible college. And some of their learning is really helpful. Some of the areas and issues that they'll deal with once they start pastoring were never mentioned in their college or in their seminary. So they find they're wrestling with problems and issues they haven't really had to wrestle before. Also, I think it's important to know, I think for all of us, we don't know what we don't know. Pastoring for 10 years and kind of reading the odd book, the odd blog, going to an odd conference here and there, but they're not quite in touch with what current trends are in church health and church growth and in contemporary leadership. And sometimes you just need someone coming and saying, look, tell me what the reason is that you do that you currently do. And they'll say, well, we do that because we get this result and that happens there. And so I said, well, do you want to look at that from another angle? So a lot of the time I'm finding, Sharon, I'm actually bringing fresh eyes to their situation, because we just get used to seeing things a certain way and at a certain angle. Someone comes along who's never seen it before and really notices things that to them they no longer see because they're so familiar with it. But I'll come along and say, okay, what's that? Like a church I was in recently, they had a sign over their stage and their platform, and the sign didn't make an awful lot of sense to me, being there for the very first time. So I asked the pastor the next day, I said, what's that sign? What sort of message you're trying to do with that sign? What are you trying to say through that sign? And he was very familiar with it, was easily able to tell me. And so I said, would you like to hear what it's like for a first-time visitor to see that sign? And because pastors, by the time they get you in, they're up for anything. They said, yeah, tell me whatever. I said, okay, here's my thoughts about it. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So maybe think of replacing the sign, but give us some thought. So I do a lot of asking questions and a lot of listening to try and get the context. I don't find until I'm in an on-site consult, I need to be there 48, 72 hours to really grasp the context and then work within that framework. I don't like coming with a here's a package, add water, see you later approach. It's very much finding the context, working with the context, understanding their situation. You can only do that if you ask great questions and then listen really hard.
Okay. So it's a bit like Android users. They need fresh eyes to be able to see how good Apple is. Is that what you're saying?
Look, I'm totally amoral when it comes to helping either Apple or Android people. I don't never judge anyone by the unfortunate devices they might be using. Yes, I even help pastors that use Apple iPhones, iPads, Macs, everything. I'm quite happy to help.
That's good. So it sounds to me like you go into a church and you know what sort of pieces a church is going to have to the jigsaw puzzle. So they're going to have to deal with buildings and staffing and finance and things like that. But it's going to be different for every church. You have to really contextualize the information. And also it's going to change over time. So the current trends are basically presenting a new picture or a new puzzle to solve. Yep. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
There's the primary, I guess, framework that we have, the guidelines we have is I work on pathways. So we analyze 12 very specific pathways in the life of the church. And
So
I guess,
explain what a pathway is.
yeah, so a question I'll ask a pastor is, okay, down the street there, you've got a house and there's a young family living there. They've got 3 children under 8. They know nothing about Jesus. They know nothing about your church. They're really not that interested. How do you get that family from that house into sitting in the second row of your church, worshiping, interested in the preaching, children-loving kids' church, volunteering in a small group, connected, giving financially, helping build the church, advance the kingdom? How does someone get from their home to that place of connection and service? Now, that people wend their way through that journey. Every church is filled with people who were once totally disinterested, who are now completely and utterly involved and committed. So I think there's a pathway between that home and that second row, if you like. So when we look at these 12 pathways in the life of the church, what we're helping pastors to do is clear the clutter off the pathway and get the signs fixed up. You think of a freeway. A freeway is a freeway because there's no clutter on the roads. You can do 100 kilometers an hour. You can cruise down there. And when you want to get off the freeway and go somewhere else on a different track, there's a great sign warning you of what's coming up. What happens in churches is a lot of the pathways get cluttered and the signs get broken, and so someone doesn't even know kind of even the entry point of a church. So I'll get real pragmatic right down to the detail here. So one of the pathways we look at with the church is their visitor pathway. How does someone find you? So first place I go to for that is not the front door of the church or the car park. It's actually the website, the church's website. So let's have a look at the front page of your website. What's that like to the young family living down the road in that home? When they look at that front page of the website, what does it mean to them as a visitor? Because more than likely, visitors are going to visit your website rather than your regular church members. Unless you've got a blog going there that everyone wants to see, or interesting content coming up that people want to go back to. But look, the majority of church websites are pretty static. So they tend to be found by visitors, but our experience in consulting is that kind of first step on the pathway is generally pretty cluttered and not well signed for a visitor.
Right.
So we kind of help fix the signs up, clear the clutter off, and at least start the movement towards the church. So that's the basic
you put
philosophy.
A freeway on their website. That's a really interesting concept. Never heard it communicated like that before. That's good. Yeah. I was just thinking of my pathway. So 28 years ago, I visited my mum. I was living in Sydney. She was living in Perth. She was going to your church, and you preached, and I said, "Oh, I like that bloke's preaching," and then I was never going to visit the church again. And she started sending me cassette tapes of a series you did on the Lord's Prayer.
Wow.
And I think I got about 6 cassette tapes. She'd send me one each week. And now I'm in the church.
Wow.
So the pathways today are not cassette tapes, are they? They're changing current trends. Yeah.
The deal today is probably no one's going to come to our church through a cassette tape, I would say. No one's going to get connected. So I think the pathways, we can send you a cassette tape if you would like to help you on your journey, but probably haven't got a cassette tape player would be the problem. People would look at it, what is this? Where do I put this? How do I listen to this? Where do the earphones go?
So let's talk about the current trends. What's happening now? Forget about what happened 28 years ago. As far as buildings go, what's happening in buildings that's working, that's effective for pastors right now?
Yeah, look, I think there's a real well-established trend now to more ambient lighting in buildings. So rather than having all the lights on all the time for every part of the service, to actually dial the lighting down during some time of the service, maybe during even the initial sort of entrance into the building where the lighting's more ambient, where you can kind of get in there. Especially if you're a visitor, you don't want to walk into somewhere that's got fluoro lights on everywhere and you feel spotlighted because you already feel awkward. And also ambient lighting does create a more contemplative, reflective atmosphere, maybe even a quietening down, whereas bright lights tend to waken you up. So I think there's a big trend on that of really attentiveness to lighting. There's also a trend in terms of size of auditoriums today. Irregular attendance is the go comparatively to 30 years ago. When I started pastoring, people were coming to church twice on a Sunday, very regularly twice on a Sunday, and they were committed weekly to some midweek event, either midweek church or a midweek small group. That was just pretty well the regular norm. Not so many options 30 years ago. Nowadays, people are going to church once on a Sunday and maybe once every fortnight, a few weeks to a connect group. But the reality is those people who are going twice a week, Sunday morning, Sunday night 30 years ago, probably going once a fortnight now. So it's almost cut attendance down by regularity by a third even. So more and more pastors are struggling with the issue of irregular attenders. So there is now a trend, and I think we'll see this emerge in the next 10 to 20 years especially, where auditoriums, large auditoriums is already happening, I know in the States, are not getting built. They're building small auditoriums to cater for that more irregular attender, and then looking at multiple meetings, utilising the floor space double or three times over a weekend. I've noticed the few auditoriums that have been built in the last few years, both that I've seen with clients of mine in Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne, going towards this trend of a smaller, more compact auditorium, because I think primarily in a service, you're after a couple of things in terms of ambience, if you like. You're after an atmosphere that feels energetic, feels alive, feels like people are in the building, and you're also after that presence of God, that some people call it anointing, some people call it touch of God, but that sense of awareness that Christ is in the service.
Definitely.
So you need to pay attention to both the spirituality of your building in terms of creating a place where there is the presence of God, but also you want to pay attention to the physicality of your building, that you're actually creating a place where atmosphere is also made room for, that there's a sense of, gee, it's kind of good to be here, there's a nice feeling within this building. So utilizing lighting, color, sound. Far more churches today are using the technical term, it sounds funny, but it's called noodling, where basically music fill it's kind of added in various parts of the service where someone's doing announcements, and rather than just have a blanket silence behind you, there's someone noodling on a keyboard or guitar, creating some sort of fill. And so pastors today, I would say, comparative to 20, 30 years ago with their buildings, are far more aware of atmosphere. Probably it does come a bit out of some of the cafe culture that's rampant through the world today, where it's not just the coffee, it's the experience. The experience is created by the atmosphere and what the furniture is like and the mood and the dress of the people serving you and so on. So I think people are far more used to ambient atmospheres that lend themselves to whatever's going on in that situation. So we need to be thinking about buildings. So pastors need to get the flowers and the trees off the platform, 90s sort of style stuff. They need to be looking at the colours and thinking, what's a current colour? You can get a colour consultant in for $200, look at your building and go, give me a current colour, because colours will stay in buildings for 7 to 10 years. So you can repaint with a current colour. Don't get beige. Go for a bit of colour, a bit of life in a building.
And they send a message, don't they? When you see an out-of-date colour, it says something about the whole church, not just about the colour of that. So it's important. You mentioned staffing there as well. What part do they play? Are there any current trends in staffing?
Yep. Yeah, I think there's some good shifts going on in staffing that I talk a lot with our clients. When a church gets to 150 plus, it starts to looking at let's employ some other part-time pastors on staff, gets to 300 plus, let's really build the team in terms of staffing, and generally that starts out in part-time roles, and sometimes we'll stay in part-time roles. There'll be some women who don't want to work full-time, so it suits them. Some guys who are bivocational have another business, so work a couple of days for the church. So I think some of the trends that are definitely beyond a fad now, definitely established as a trend in churches, is not so much employing people to do pastoral care. When I started out pastoring 30 years ago, the visitation of the church was a huge deal. So you would employ people and pay their petrol money or pay them an hourly rate to actually go out and visit people during the day or during the evening. Now, some churches are still replicating that style, but I think that's done, dusted, old, needs to be put away. Today, I would encourage churches never employ anyone for pastoral care.
Okay, so if you're not employing someone, how do they get pastoral care? Do people not need pastoral care anymore, or?
Yeah, I think there's a truth to the fact that people need less pastoral care today.
Wow.
Now that may say strange, but the shift of women into the workforce over the last 30 years means there are far less women at home sitting around kind of saying, okay, who's going to visit me, who can I connect with? You find a lot of working women are just too busy. Don't bother with a visit. Don't come to my home, for goodness sake. You know, I work all week. The kids are trashing it. Don't visit me. We'll meet in a cafe. There's a whole different culture of connection today that's not as home-based as it was 30 years ago. I think that's done and dusted. That's a trend that's established. So I think the challenge now for pastors is to get pastoral care, and I'm talking a basic loving care of people. I'm not talking crisis counselling or major sort of scenarios. Generally, they'll need to be handled by pastors, so off-handed to professionals. But I think the general pastoral care of a church must go down into a small group structure. Must happen at that level. So connect groups, basically getting people into a small group where they look after one another, they care for one another. They basically do New Testament living, love one another, care for one another, pray for one another, be interested in one another. So the challenge, I think, is getting more people into a small group system. Also knowing that, look, generally if a church can get around 45–50% of their people in a small group, that's pretty well average, that's pretty normative. If you can get that number into 60–65% or more, you're really starting to get into realms of great health. If you get into 70–80%, you're either got a miracle or you're lying, or you've got just an interesting spike in attendance in your small groups. It's very hard to sustain 70% more. So
I think ours is around about 65–66%, I think. So it's healthy.
Our church, that's fantastic. That's really a healthy number, and it's hard to get more than 70%. So you want to know what your expectation is. Out of that 30–35 not coming to a small group when it's up around 65, you're going to get 10 or 15 who would not go to a small group if you paid them to go. They take the money and never turn up. So in some ways, you've got to recognize those people are going to be hard to care for. Then you've got 10–15% who can't go because of lifestyle, health, work, whatever. And that's where you put, if you're going to put any paid resources, I'd put it into that 10–15–20% who cannot get to a small group. But I'd be amping up. One of my clients has done something brilliant this year that we don't know if it works yet, but intuitively I think this is a brilliant idea and could work. They've actually, in their small groups, they've actually put a leader to run the meeting for the small group, and an assistant leader to help the leader basically with the meeting. Then what they've established in each small group has this is my terminology, a pastoral care worker. Someone whose role it is to get love happening. Meals, birthdays, surprises, just make sure there's plenty of love in the group. And they have an assistant as well. So you have a couple of people thinking about the small group meeting, and then a couple of other people in the group are thinking about how do we make sure everybody's getting loved in the room here. Now, I think that's a brilliant strategy. I haven't heard of anyone doing that before, but quite a few people I've mentioned to said, I'm going to try that because I can see the benefit. Because some people are great at running meetings, but not so good at loving people. And sometimes people are good at loving people and not that great with, oh, I don't want to run a meeting, but let me care for someone. So I think kind of, and if you have one person focused on making sure the love happens, if they're a smart person, they won't be doing all the loving. They'll be mobilizing others. So you get this culture built in the church. It's not about a person being paid 3 days a week to make sure everyone gets loved and cared for. It's about the whole body loving one another. Surely that's more New Testament than employing staff.
Yeah.
On the other staff stuff, well, I'm encouraging pastors to not employ people in the worship area, not employ people in the pastoral care area, but spend money on employing a new people's pastor. Someone who focuses on discipling of new Christians, someone who focuses on that whole pathway of visitors, of getting visitors connected to the church, and then assimilated into integrated once they get into the life of the church, making sure they get into a small group. I'd rather pay money to a staff member doing that than to someone visiting people, because that's going to amplify the health of your church. Another area I'm encouraging pastors to consider in employing people is employ someone half a day a week to be the volunteers director, the serving director, the volunteers pastor, if you like. And their entire role is to make sure that everyone in the church is mobilized in serving in the life of the church. Now, that's a far better use of money, and that will have a bigger impact on church health than pastoral care, or every day of the week.
Okay. So you mentioned a couple of, while we were talking about those kind of staffing trends, we also kind of covered small groups and visitors and volunteers. So are there other kind of trends in those areas as well? What about small groups? Are there other trends for small groups?
Yeah, look, probably the other trend besides that pastoral care worker, I would say is running small groups term by term. So whether some parts of the world is 3 terms, school terms a year, other parts like Australia it's 4 terms. So actually running a group for a limited amount of time, so people come join the group. It may be for a particular teaching course on DVD or presented by someone, or it may be based around a particular stage of life course. It generally has an outcome in mind. With that, and basically run the group, go hard for that term, or 2 terms, might be a semester, half a year, and then close the group down, excuse me, and then relaunch the group, maybe with the same course or a different course, different leader, and so on. So people tend to have a shorter time span they're committing to, so that helps in people's terms of their time and utilising their time.
I think that's a trend in business too, people moving away from annualised thinking, where everything sort of used to be planned for a year and budgets used to be done for a year, and they found that people were really productive in the last month of the year because they were trying to meet all of their deadlines. So now they're much more doing 90-day stints where they have a project and outcomes and plans and budgets for 90 days, and I find that people are much more productive. If you have 4 of them, you're 4 times more likely to hit than if you just have the annualized thinking. So that's interesting that small groups in the church are kind of reflecting that as well.
Yeah.
What about with visitors?
Yeah, look, huge amount with visitors. The whole use of social media to get connected to people. So the church today that doesn't have a Facebook page, you'd have to ask, is that church alive? Does that church exist if it's not on Facebook? In Australia, well, I would kind of say in some ways it doesn't exist as far as the community goes, as far as people out there go. So the Sydney Morning Herald last year wrote about the fact that every single day in Australia, 9 million Australians are accessing Facebook. Now that's not the number of people who are on Facebook, as I've got a Facebook kind of page or whatever, I'm a Facebook user. That's actual access every single day of the year, 9 million. So if a pastor discounts Facebook as an option, I think I could kind of wonder, what are you there for? You must have a doorway, a Facebook doorway, and then utilizing that Facebook doorway, not just to promote. The worst thing on social media, I think, is the thing that I just tell people what I'm doing. It is social media, so engaging with people, throwing interesting thing on your Facebook page, using it to disciple people, use it to stir some interest, some discussion. Facebook is brilliant because you can put visual media on it so easily, videos, pictures of events and various things that you're doing, feeding back to people what's going on in the life of your church. So using Facebook, Google, Twitter, all these sort of social media ways, just to create a presence in the community so people can stumble across you and find you. I think it's a big trend in visitors. There's a real, this is an out there, I wouldn't call it a trend at this stage, but there's an out there thing that some churches are offering. I know our church is offering this in the last year or so. It's called a guest experience, where you go to the website and you find out that you can tell the church, hey, I'm coming to visit your church. I want a guest experience. And people are actually using this in the life of our church. And so when they arrive, they'll find the visitor's carpe, which of course any church switched on today is going to have that. They'll rock into the church, they'll be met by a volunteer or a staff member, and part of that visitor experience is they'll get to sit with someone, they'll have a little chat to them, be friendly to them and so on. They'll get a tour of the facility, they'll get a chance over coffee to ask every single question about the church that they want. This is a really good idea for churches. It's nowhere near trending. I'm not sure if even there's enough trending going on about awareness of visitors, Sharon, in churches, to be honest with you. But this simple little device of just saying to people who are really interested in finding out everything about the church. There is a trend away from the let's just leave people alone, let them find their own journey into the church. I think that used to be strong back in the 90s when seeker services were really the go. There's a lot of emphasis on seekers. Let people come in, work it out themselves, leave when they want, let's not annoy them or anything. I think the problem with that emphasis is churches got too hands-off with their visitors, so the young family down in the road bringing their 3 kids for the first time who want to know everything. Do you have child protection? Are your workers police cleared? They weren't getting the attention they needed, so I think the fact that they're getting more attention is great today.
Definitely. I think we're in an economy and a culture where attention is what people really want and what they're used to. We're used to being able to watch, something on a national scale, like an election or a news story, whatever, and being able to have our 2 cents worth and tweet that to the rest of the world or put that on Facebook or whatever. We're used to, taking some of the attention away from even national events and putting it on ourselves. So, it's interesting.
I think one trend that will emerge, and I think I don't know many churches doing it at the moment, but I think one trend that will emerge will be reviews by church members on their church. So whether it be on
I'd love to rate you, Fitzgerald.
Sorry?
I'd love to rate you.
Yeah, totally. Do a review on me somewhere on Google Plus or something. The churches with Google Plus pages, they can get kind of ratings, reviews. Kind of do all sorts of things. You can do reviews on Facebook pages as well. I did one for my friend Kelvin Phillips in South Africa. He's got a Facebook page, so I went and wrote a review on it. So what a great church, this is what you'll find in this church, rated 5 stars and so on. I think churches would be smart to start getting video reviews up on their social media, on their website, on their Facebook page, on Google+, and places where you can ever put a review about an organisation. I think churches, it's nowhere near a trend. Not many people are doing it. But I could see that a huge adjunct for churches in terms of visitors. When you go to Amazon to buy a book, you look at the price, you look at the reviews. That's what I look at. No reviews and expensive, I'm probably moving on pretty quick from that book.
Yeah.
Because it's going to cost me a lot. If the price is high and the reviews are really good, I'll go, oh, okay, I'll do it. Because the reviews have convinced me, and especially if there's any reviews done by anyone I know who's an authority in my world, I am adding bonus after bonus to that book or to that business or that cafe. That'll be a trend, I think, in the next 10 years. Pastors will cotton onto the fact that outsiders want to know information before they turn up. And to have, you know, a member, and sometimes raw footage is better than well-produced footage. Raw footage of a member with a handheld phone, it's a bit rough and ready. And this is what I really like about my church. They look after my kids. It's fantastic. I'll come for coffee in a minute. Hang on. Yeah, I love my church. Really good place. You should come. That sort of raw footage is going to get more cred with people who are kind of going, oh, maybe I should go to this place. But if it's all too musicked up and too pro, you know, too professional, too slick, I think, well, churches need to keep that grassroots feel about that sort of stuff, especially. But I hope that becomes a trend.
That's the trend in business too. If you look at things like, I don't know if you've heard of Uber, which is sort of like taking over taxis with private vehicles, Airbnb, which is taking over away from bed and breakfast with just normal houses, Elance, and no recruitment company involved. Amazon, as you said, it's all about creating a platform of trust, and the way you do that is you allow other people who have no vested interest but have tried the service to say, look, this was my experience and this is my review. You know, I'd let them into my house again, or I loved the view but the rooms were really pokey, or whatever. It's just an honest, raw review. That's a big trend in business, so probably definitely come into the church, I would say. Yeah. What about, I know when I'm talking to pastors, and I know a lot of pastors and they're wonderful, positive people and normally really encouraging and optimistic, but I do know one way to get them quite grumpy, and the key is that you've got to talk about how there's just not enough volunteers these days. Are there any trends in volunteers and getting more people engaged in service?
Yeah, I think there is a number of trends. That volunteer director position, and you don't need, that doesn't need to be a staff member. Create the position, then fill it. I find in churches are doing that with volunteers, and because that's pretty well their primary sole role, they can give time and attention to it. So that's definitely a trend going on, and more focus on that. I think there's a fabulous trend that has gained real traction the last 10, 15 years in Australia, which is a bit anti-cultural in Australia. We're not great at championing our heroes, our people who stand up above the crowd. The tall poppy syndrome is an Australian condition where we tend to lock people down to our own size. So there is a great trend that's anti-cultural of celebrating the work of volunteers. And I remember in church years ago that it was kind of almost considered not proper if you applauded someone after they sang a magnificent item song or something, and people clapped kind of half-heartedly because they were a bit worried that, no, I don't want to get the person too proud, or we don't want to take glory away from the Lord, or whatever. There was kind of a culture of not giving praise too much. Keep the praise down. We don't want to get carried away. I think that's getting totally smashed in our churches. It needs to still go more. But the fact that volunteers are regularly celebrated in front of their church, they're appreciated, there's little gifts given, there's little interviews with them, hey, why do you love volunteering? That's definitely a trend that I think is a fabulous thing. I think a lot more effort is being put into training of volunteers, to their development in their roles, in their leadership, in the tasks they've got to do. A lot more pastors are thinking through, how can I, one, motivate my volunteers to kind of keep them kind of geared up with what they're doing, fired up about it, and two, how can I train them better? How can I kind of get that training happening so that they're a better greeter, they're a better kids worker, they're a better youth worker? So resourcing those volunteers with the skills and the right attitudes. A lot more work and endeavours going on in that area as well. I think there's probably a greater recognition of the fact that our churches achieve what they achieve on the back of people who serve. I think that would be part of what we do today. I think if you go back, and I'm going back to my early days in church life, if you went back 40 years, I think there was a great basic idea that the pastor did a bundle of stuff. There are a few people helping out, but generally the church was about attendance more than involvement. These days, I think it's far more about involvement than just attendance. So I think pastors are definitely another trend, getting more savvy in recruiting people and then retaining those people to make sure that they're doing training and motivating that kind of keeps them on side.
Yeah, and again, in business, it used to be a lot about content. So, example, with websites, business would be delivering their content to people. Now it's much more about community and building a platform where my customers can talk to each other, my suppliers can talk to us, and reviewers can learn from each other. Customers can help out. We can find out how our customers are using our content, rather than just there being like a one-way conversation where the pastor's doing everything. It's definitely about community more.
Yeah, there's what's interesting to me is an app that I've started using, probably 18 months ago, WhatsApp, which is a group messaging app, basically. You form a group and then you share messages. It's like instant messaging merged with SMS on steroids. That's how I describe it. And I hear a lot of pastors and leaders now using it, and especially in the last 6 months, I'm hearing that more and more. They're using it and they're creating groups of their leaders, and then they're getting their leaders to create groups of their leaders, and they're using it for all sorts of things. So some of it's informational, some of it's just fun, some of it's a bit of discipling, some of it's just reminders about meetings or whatever. But it's kind of it's like a spider web. It kind of networking people together. So if I was running, if I had a team of say greeters in the church, I would get them all on WhatsApp and just kind of connect them up even more, throw them little links to great little blog posts to read, little encouragements, little kind of, hey, this is a great way to, if you can't make it this Sunday, put the request out on WhatsApp. Hey, who can fill in for me? Who wants to swap rosters? So it kind of keeps everyone in the loop without being too intrusive. And let's face it, does this ever leave anybody's side anymore, this little phone?
No.
It does. I don't keep my phone next to me 24 hours a day, but,
especially if it's got an apple on it, it never leaves you.
Yes, it's tattooed in a bit of a link to your arm there. It's kind of what's it dangling off your arm there. Yeah, that's a great little device to do that. And look, I know it's all digital, and people get a bit hairy about that. Oh, it's not real. Look, if you've never seen that person in real life, totally true. There's no eyeballs in the conversation. But if you use it to amplify your connection to that person, if you're using it as an adjunct, it just adds to your relationship. I've got a couple of groups. I've got a family group. I've got a group of pastors that I use it with, and it just keeps us in each other's world more regularly than just the eyeball contact. So see it as an adjunct. Don't get threatened by it. Look, I think that's a great device for keeping volunteers in that place of community that's so important today, to keep that sense of relationship. And we're doing this together as a team, not just me slogging it out by myself. Yeah.
Now, it's a controversial subject, so some people might not go there, but I want to go there because I don't mind a bit of controversy. But
okay.
Can we talk about money? It's one of my favourite subjects. Are there any trends?
No, Sharon, no, not the money. Not the money.
Come on, there must be some difference between a healthy, growing church and a shrinking, dying church. Yeah. And I'm figuring that finances would have some part to play in that.
I love talking about money. I'm joking about them though. And you are the money whiz, so folks need to get with Sharon about finance as well, because you have some fabulous insights about finances and financial structures within organisations as well. So, and you've been a great help to us on that, can I say? Look, I love talking about money because people think about money. People talk about money. People are anxious about money. People are happy about money. Money is something that's in everyone's world every day, and people, I would say, every week are consciously wrestling with the money deal. And I'm talking general life. So when it comes to churches, healthy churches face the money beast. They look at it square in the eye and go, you know what, if we're going to fulfill the mission, the mandate we have from Christ, we have to raise resources. And that's people resources, volunteers, that's time resources, but it's also literally we need dollars and cents in the bank. We need financial resources flowing to us. So one of the pathways, the 12 pathways we look at, is the financial pathway. So healthy churches, what healthy churches do is they talk about money. They talk about how they're raising it. They talk about how they're spending it. They help people with their financial world. They're not just interested in getting people to be generous. They're deeply interested in people getting wise with their money. They're concerned about people being content with the amount of money they've got, while at the same time trying to improve themselves, but learn to live with a, yep, I'm going to be content. I've got enough. I'm good to go with what I've got here. So I think a pastor who hasn't broached this topic with his church regularly, you know, one of the things that a coach does is kind of help people face. Because one of the things I do as a pastor, as a coach, is I help pastors face the things that they don't really necessarily want to face. Now, 30 years of pastoring gives me great empathy for pastors, so I'm never harsh with a pastor, I'm never tough on them. But I kind of help them ask a few questions and kind of help them go to places that sometimes they're a bit scared to go. And one of them is money. So some pastors for years will never talk to their church about money. And I say to them, that's probably not helping the people who have $10,000 credit card debt hanging over them every month. And you're not helping them actually deal with that. So I suggest to them, you're probably not discipling them well in the financial zones of their life. And so if you begin to address it in your church, it'll help them address it as well. I also help churches analyze their financial flow. Are they making it easy for people to give? Is it difficult to give online? Is it difficult to give through internet banking? Could they use an app like PushPay to actually help them increase the ease of giving? Again, as pathways, Sharon, get the clutter off the financial pathway, get it well signed so it's very easy for someone to give. And then I do talk to pastors about extra giving beyond their regular Sunday tithes and offerings. Talk to them about special project giving. Most churches could take whatever their annual income on a general Sunday normative giving is. Most churches have the capacity to raise at least 30% of that amount again in special project giving.
Right.
Now, a lot of churches, too many churches don't do project giving related to buildings or outreach or missions or special projects. A lot of churches don't do it, or they tend to do it fairly haphazardly, and so they may raise 5%, 10%, 15%, but generally with a really good focus on it and some help from Grow a Healthy Church, we've seen those numbers increase in churches. Because if you're doing no special project giving, in the first year you could increase your income just by really being wise and smart about it. You could add 10%.
That's amazing, isn't it?
15%.
That's
and
great.
Look, any pastor would take, and any business would take, a 10% lift in income.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that's one of the things we do help churches do is smarten that up and shape that up in a way. And it's not about the heavy push, the big pressure thing. I'm not into that. You want church health. You just don't want to treat it like a cash cow that you milk every year or something like that. It is about healthy processes that produce healthy results within the life of the church.
So let me talk about metrics. You mentioned there a 10% increase, so you're measuring that. Are there any trends in what you measure? I know in business there's key performance indicators, key success factors, dashboards. What sort of things, is a healthy church measuring? Yeah,
I think a number of things that you're measuring, getting a good handle on. The number of people volunteering in your kind of 18-year-old plus spectrum. So once we're out of that high school plus, and generally your scope you're looking for, this varies widely, but let me give a bit of an average out there and pastors can work on it from there. So you're looking around about 45 to 55% scope of people volunteering in your church. Now the bigger your church is, the less that number will be. So in a church of 1,000, 2,000, that number will drop off because you will have a bigger crowd, fringe element in a larger church. In a church that's smaller, so say a church of around your 300, that figure should be climbing towards 70%. You should be able to get 70% of your 18 plus involved. But as churches grow, that number tends to shift down. But I think unless you're in a real large church, you should be shooting for 60, 70% in your kind of 200, 300, 400, 500 church or less than that. I think attendance, it's good to not only note attendance against your total database. That generally these days can float from your attendance, and I'm talking across the median here, across the average. 50% to 65% of your church will be turning up each Sunday. That's a pretty regular sort of figure. It's pushing down more towards 50, where it used to be more towards 65. It's trending that way. That's a thing that's another topic, all that irregular attendance thing. But in terms of also who's there on a Sunday, it's good to kind of work out. Say if you've got 200 people in church, how many of those are youth and how many of those are children? So in terms of 0 to 12, if you've got 200 in church, rough percentage, it's good to be kind of sitting around 20% as a minimum of that number that are children, 12 and under. And in terms of teenagers, around about 10%. So say you've got 200 rocking up into church on a Sunday, you want about 40 of that to be kids and about 20 to be teenagers. Because what's going to happen in 10 years, those kids are going to be in the youth group, those youth group are going to be in the church as young marrieds. That 10 years is going to go past really quick. If those numbers get really unhealthy and they're down to 5% of your 200 as children, you're not far away from being a steeply declining church, a dying church, not a healthy church. So they're really good things to assess.
It sounds like
Sorry,
it sounds like you've got lots and lots of data and demographics and things that you can help pastors with. Are there any trends in how pastors can help? Like, is coaching and consulting the things that you do, is that a trend? Because it sounds like it's very complex. And that there are lots of things going on, that there is, if I look at my Instagram feed, I'm pretty sure that pastors just travel around the world having coffee with each other. But
I wish.
You're telling me that there seems to be more to it. So how can pastors get help?
Look, it's way more complex. Pastoring today compared to when I started 30, it's way more complex. And I think the complexity is growing, as it is in life in general. And so I think to get a good handle on I talk about getting a handle on the metrics and a handle on the stories. So you need the metrics, but you need the stories to give you context as a consultant. So is consulting and coaching on an upward trend? Very much so. The Baptist Church here in Western Australia, people training in their seminary, it's now required that they have a coach. So it's a mandatory part of their course. And I don't think it's the whole course they have to be coached, but for a certain segment of their life in training, they have to have a coach. They told me this, they said they're trying to shift the culture to where it's really unusual to not be coached rather than it's strange to be coached. So they're trying to turn that around. Now, I think that'll become a trend in the next 20 years. It'll gradually get to the point where pastors go, you know what, there's too much coming at me to work out. I need someone to sit beside me to help sift and focus. Yeah. And that's consultants and coaches help you sift and focus. And they go, let's sort out, let's get you zeroed in here. Okay, now focus in on this. That'll produce results. And I know, 30 years of pastoring, I've got a master's degree, 41 consults done last 2 years. I know what will produce results.
Yeah.
I'll guarantee church health results for a church. Church growth, whole nother matter, X factor, who knows. But church health, you can bring health to a church with certain focuses that you have. And I think it's a great trend. It's a growing trend, no doubt.
Okay. So I've noticed on your blog that there's some insider tips that you have where, like, every month, is it, you have, like, they can get a free book and you have a video review and... Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So do you want to tell us about Insider Tips?
Yeah, we've just launched Insider Tips. Basically, pastors can't keep up with the reading of books and blogs they've got, so I'm a reading addict. I'm an avid reader. So I subscribe to about 300 blogs. I'm reading books, huge amount of books, and I read in specific fields of leadership, church health, church growth as well. So every month, launching the first of each month, we send book reviews out, church health tips. They're very short videos. They're 3-minute videos, short and snappy. Di does a video for pastors' wives, conversation with pastors' wives. We also have a bit of an article about church health, church growth. And I put links in there because I find so much good material. I put links in there that I don't share anywhere else on social media. So I save some of the juicier, really good stuff I've read for Insider Tips. It's only $6.99 a month, a couple of cups of coffee. In Perth, that's 1.5 cups of coffee. A couple of cups of coffee a month. Plus, I throw in a free book when you sign up. It's
That's a ridiculous price. So that's less than the cost of the book. Plus, you're reading it for me. And getting all the nuggets of gold, analysing it, and putting it into a 3-minute form where I don't have to waste my time. And it's only $6.99.
Yep.
I think maybe we need to talk about value.
I need another money coaching session.
I think we do. Well, all of this stuff has been great, John. I think you've given us too much stuff. I'm not even sure if we've got time to have questions, but I do want to talk about the online consults as well, because we've got Phil from Canada, we've got Jude from Adelaide, we've got people from all over the world on the call. So how can people have an online consult with you?
Yeah, on our website, just go to our website, growhealthychurch.com. There's a menu item there for consults. Go through there, and there's 4 plans. You can actually try one for free, which we analyse a couple of pathways. It's limited, but gives you a taster. I'm happy to do that. And then there's 4 plans: bronze, silver, and gold, ranging in price from $5.99 to $19.99. And a couple of the plans, silver and gold, have some coaching elements, but it's pretty well a full analysis. What we would do if we're on site with you in terms of analysis and talking with you about these pathways in your church. So it's kind of the free one and the bronze one. Bronze one's pretty inexpensive. It gives you a bit of a taste of what consulting can be like and what it can do for you. And it is cheaper than on-site. Obviously, I'm not going to be accommodated, looked after, and so on. So it's an inexpensive way to try out consulting. The end result is you're going to get some clarity, you're going to get some focus, you're going to have, out of that clarity and focus, guaranteed renewed confidence about where to lead, how to lead, and what to do in your leading as well. So, check us out on the website. Try the free one. Give us a shot.
I'm just saying you can win one. Is that still going? There's a contest?
Yeah. There is a competition on at the moment. If you head over to our website, you'll see a little banner come up. You can click on there. I'm giving away 3 consults: a bronze, a silver, and a gold consult. Finishes up, I think, on Saturday, the competition, and pick the winners, and 3 lucky people will be getting a free consult from me. Should be great. Wow. So get on our website, easy.
How much is the gold one worth?
$1,999. I'm giving one away for free. $2,000 worth of consulting.
Far out. Okay. Well, that's definitely worth a few clicks to enter that, I would think.
Yeah, definitely a few clicks, and I've had people from around the world jumping in on that competition, so it's pretty exciting. It's great.
Yeah. I've just got a comment here, John. I've heard, I should say who it's from, Josh Reading or Reading. John, I've heard it said a lot lately that regularity in attendance is dropping, and it sort of seems obvious. The primary response seems to be playing to convenience rather than discipling people in recognising the need for regularity. Are we bearing the fruit of treating people as spiritual consumers? It's a good question.
Great question. Yeah, look, I would say that the trend is almost locked in. However, and actually in my preaching the last 6 months, I have been weaving into it with churches the thought of the Westfield consumer, Westfield Christian, who just wants it all for them. I think pastors can address this issue and disciple people out of it. And I think it does start with your key leaders, and then with your volunteers, and then with your congregation. And if you went on a process and you took the time, so it's just not a beat over the head one Sunday, hey, you guys turn up more regular, because you're talking to the people who are there, so it's a bit of a waste of time.
Yeah.
You're better off thinking this again in terms of
I've got a message to everyone who's not hearing me.
Yeah. It's kind of like counterintuitive, isn't it? Look, if I was pastoring today, I would address it, and I would do it as a process, and I would take 12 months to start to shift the culture of my church. Hey, you're not here once a month. That's not attending church. That's a hobby. Turn up every week. Unless you're really ill, turn up every week. Why not? You can. I think people can. I think it is a laziness. I think there is. I know there are, time factors, etc., etc. But I think bottom line of it, hard issue. I'm going hardcore here, but anyway, last part of the webinar. Yep. I think if a pastor wants to tackle for it, Josh, tackle it, go for it, disciple it, but do it as a process with your leaders. Let it be a conversation. Understand why people are doing it. Don't just kind of get up there and bang, and you'll be smart enough to do that, Josh, I'm sure, as a leader. But do it as a process, in a conversation. Start having the talk of your church. And I don't think you have to live with it as a pastor. I think you can address it and swing it around. I think people will start to give priority to it and start to get a conviction. You know what? I need to have my family in church every single Sunday, holidays, whatever. And if I'm really ill, but I need to make it a regular, solid commitment that I don't squelch on, because I would rather go and have a coffee in a cafe or something. So, yeah, you can shift it. You don't have to live with it.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we've run out of time. So we only got to one question, but it was an excellent question and a great answer. So thank you very much for being here today. I really enjoyed it. I know it's going to help a lot of pastors, and I'm going to redirect everyone straight away to the Insider Tips. Because that has both the Insider Tips offer and the free consult promotion as well, and I thoroughly recommend both of them. I do all I can to drag content out of John Finkelty whenever I can, and I suggest that you do the same. And if you can win a $2,000 consult just by entering this competition this week, I think you're mad if you don't. So thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, for being
Sharon.
here, and we'll see you next time. There'll be a replay if you missed out on some of it. So thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure.